obvious to all of you who are here today that highway needs will remain very great in West Virginia and throughout the country. There will be an urgency, of course, to complete the interstate highway program that was felt in West Virginia. And so during this period of time, our primary and our secondary roads have not received the attention that Governor Moore and many of us would have liked these type of roads to receive. Completion of the interstate system, and that probably will be in 6 or 7 years, will allow the people of the United States, especially West Virginia, to think in terms of the resources that we must expend to improve the primary and the secondary roads of this state, which in a sense, as throughout the nation, have been permitted to deteriorate during the last 10 or 12 years.
In the late 1700s, roads in America were little more than simple wagon tracks, often making even the shortest trip an adventure. With the end of the Revolution, a new American nation now extended west, beyond the Ohio to the Mississippi. This was rich land, full of promise, but rising up less than 100 miles from Washington were the Allegheny Mountains. High and thickly forested, these mountains were difficult to cross and posed a significant natural barrier to the movement of people and goods. In 1784, George Washington left Mount Vernon on a trip to inspect land that he owned in western Pennsylvania. Washington's experiences in the West as a surveyor, a soldier, and landowner have led him to a clear vision built upon economic necessity. America needs a road that will bridge the mountains and unite the lands to the west with the rest of the nation. The nation was growing rapidly. Between the years of 1790 and 1810, the population nearly doubled from an estimated 3.9 million to over 7 million. With such rapid growth, there was great pressure to develop the land west of the Ohio. The need for a way to connect the East with the burgeoning West becomes even more evident under the presidency of Thomas Jefferson. As America acquired the vast Louisiana Territory in 1803, the size of the nation was effectively doubled. Located in the hills of southwestern Pennsylvania is Friendship Hill. This is the former home of a Swiss immigrant who served his adopted country as diplomat, scholar, businessman, and Secretary of the Treasury under Thomas Jefferson. His name, Albert Gallatin. Realizing the vision of Washington and others was no easy task. While he would never move a yard of earth in its construction, Gallatin champions the cause and becomes the political architect of the road. The problem now was not one of desire or need, it was a question of money. Who would pay for such an enterprise?
One of the great things about history is how it often repeats itself. Today we might bemoan the fact that our politicians might not get along, partisanship, might not be able to get legislation passed. Well, these things occurred in Gallatin's time as well. When he introduced the idea of a national road, there were members of Congress who did not like it. Some were fearful that the road would be beneficial to one region and not to everyone. Gallatin was eventually able to allay those concerns. Another concern would have been over financing. Where was the money going to come from? Gallatin was strapped with a very large national debt. We were also financing the Louisiana Purchase and Lewis and Clark's expedition, but Gallatin was able to find the financing with the addition of the state of Ohio. And one of the conditions for the road was that it would go to the state of Ohio, and the sale of federal lands in that new state would be used to build the road. And thus Gallatin was able to provide the financing without increasing the national debt. Quite an accomplishment.
When Congress passed the Enabling Act in April of 1802 to admit Ohio as a state in 1803, it contained a provision for the building of a road. Authorized by Congress on March 29, 1806, construction began in 1811, and by 1818 the road stretched from Cumberland, Maryland to Wheeling, Virginia.
Wheeling itself was chosen as the western terminus of the original National Road for several reasons. One, the community was already a thriving port town. There was a busy river traffic that was going on daily. The population itself was growing. Another reason is that Wheeling is located on the Ohio River, and Wheeling Island made a convenient crossing point of the river. It could break the river crossing, then done by ferry, into two manageable segments. And the third reason Wheeling was chosen is because there was already an existing nationally funded road on the western bank of the Ohio. It was called Zane's Trace, and it ran from the Ohio River to Maysville, Kentucky, literally taking a road into the heart of the western country.
In a bit of historical irony, both Pennsylvania and Virginia, states through which the road would pass, voted against it in Congress because the road would not pass through either Philadelphia or Richmond. Wheeling and the National Road had its advocates. Moses and Lydia Shepherd, prominent residents of Wheeling, were counted among the friends of Henry Clay, one of the most influential politicians of his day and a strong proponent of internal improvements.
Well, the Shepherds have a long history in this area. Moses' father and others were some of the earliest settlers. By the end of the 18th century, Moses is able to build what is the largest house in the area. It's a stone structure. May not impress somebody from the 21st century, but in the latter part of the 18th century, this is quite a mansion. Built in the Georgian style, which is what the kind of house that you would find in cities like Baltimore and New York. Very up to date, good stuff, very well appointed interiors, and as a consequence, reflects very well on their standing, which is another reason they had such influence in places like Washington and Baltimore.
Interestingly, the road passed in front of their home, which on occasion saw Clay as a guest. Moses Shepherd himself secured a contract to build bridges on the National Road. Congress specified that the road would have a right-of-way of 66 feet, with a center strip 20 feet in width, to be covered with stone, earth, gravel, and sand, with no slope having an angle of greater than 5 degrees, very close to modern road standards. The surveyors proved to be very hardy souls and dedicated to the principle of trying to secure the shortest distance between 2 points. They often endured difficult conditions and harsh weather to map this cement of union.
As you can see from looking at the roadway behind me, the original route of the National Road was built so that it followed the contours of the landscape. There were no cuts and fills to speak of on the original route. The route itself meandered across the landscape from Cumberland to Wheeling, about 131 miles in total length. The work itself was undertaken using mostly hand tools, small earth-moving equipment, ox-drawn carts, that type of thing, and the bulk of the labor was done by Irish-American immigrants who came to this country in search of work. Many of them wound up working on this project and then went on, after this was complete, to build railroads elsewhere in the country.
Erastus Loomis was here a few days since. He has moved his wife down to Wheeling. He told me he calculates to move down to New Orleans in the course of a few months. Most people think he will never go. The Honorable Henry Clay was along here last week on his way home to Kentucky with his family. He has ever been an advocate of public roads. He left his coach at Washington and went to Wheeling on horseback on the United States Road to view it with the bridges was well pleased. Ebenezer Fitch, 1818.
The period from the time of its construction to 1850 is considered the heyday of the National Road. It was a great time for the interchange of ideas, cultures, religions, and a period of technological change in America. Transportation was of great interest to the public, and the stagecoach, or old shape-guts, became a source of excitement for daring drivers who raced to make the record for mail delivery. The quickest run from Hagerstown, Maryland to Wheeling was achieved in only 15.5 hours. Even noisier and more colorful than the stagecoaches were the Conestogas, which could carry up to 3,500 pounds. White canvas tops rigged over bright red sides, blue bellies, and high ironed wheels rumbled along the road. The Conestogas made Wheeling the embarkation point for immigrants going by water to Cincinnati and Louisville. In a single day, 60 to 70 flatboats would be loaded at Wheeling for the journey west. Steamboats would arrive from Mississippi with cotton, sugar, and other goods that would be transferred to wagons to be hauled east along the National Road. The actual road was constructed largely of crushed stone in a roadbed. While this looked good on the surface, it was little more than a shallow ditch filled with rocks that eroded quickly and did not hold up well under heavy traffic. The road was showing the signs of wear. As one traveler put it, the ruts are worn so broad and deep by heavy travel that an army of pygmies might march into the bosom of the country under the cover they would afford.
In the 1830s, there was a effort to turn the national road over to the states, so that each state would operate their section of the road. But Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Maryland weren't too keen on taking over this road that had really started to fall out of repair. So part of the agreement for them to take over responsibility for National Road was that the federal government would come in and rehabilitate the road before they took over responsibility for it. So that took place from 1833 to 1839. And during that time period, the Army Corps of Engineers oversaw the project in which the bridges were repointed, the bridges and culverts. The surface of the road was redone with the macadam plan, and these cast iron mile markers were put up along the way as well.
By 1833, agreements had been reached to turn the road between Cumberland and Wheeling over to their respective states. Now the National Road would become a toll road to help pay its own way. With the coming of the National Road to Wheeling, it became necessary to bridge the Ohio. Even though the legislatures of Virginia and Ohio authorized the formation of the Wheeling and Belmont Bridge Company in 1816, it wasn't until 1847 that a bridge was actually commissioned. The task of building such a bridge fell to Charles Ellet, Jr., then the leading proponent of wire suspension bridge construction in the U.S. As early as 1836, Ellet had envisioned a bridge across the Ohio at Wheeling, even though he had never been there. The bridge Ellet designed represented the latest technology. The center span of the bridge measured 1,010 feet between the centers of the two supporting towers, making it the longest clear-span bridge in the world at the time. Today, the bridge stands as one of the finest examples of antebellum civil engineering and is considered to be one of the world's most significant and historic bridges.
I think it conveys different symbols to different people. From an engineer's point of view, you look at the world's longest span bridge, which formed an integral part of the National Road. It represents the coming of age of engineering, as far as I'm concerned. This bridge was designed with mathematical theories developed by Navier in France. And rather than simply building in a traditional way that we see in timber bridges, there was a way of calculating the actual loads in the cables so that you had a structure that was strong enough for the designed loads.
The bridge was completed at nearly the same time that the heyday of the road was coming to a close. Transportation technology was changing, and in 1852 there was a turning point in the history of the road. The railroad had arrived. The railroad offered transportation that was faster and cheaper and could carry greater loads. The road began to decline and would not recover until another wheeled vehicle entered the scene. By the late 1870s, a new contraption was available. The high-wheeled cycle appeared. A rider, perched on a seat above a 5-foot-high front wheel, could pump the pedals and could leisurely travel along a smooth road. By 1880, the safety bicycle had been developed, with its pneumatic tires, pedal-operated chain drive, and a more reasonable height. With this machine and a sunny afternoon, people were venturing out of the towns and cities onto the national road. Better roads became an important issue, and in 1880, a group of dedicated cyclists formed the League of American Wheelmen to advocate improved highways. This led to a national Better Roads movement. A newspaper article of 1886 reported, "The Wheeling Wheelmen held a well-attended and very enthusiastic meeting last evening to make arrangements for the grand bicycle meet, road race, hill contest, and general good time that the club proposes to have here on July 13 and 14. Every member of the club has entered heartily into the project, and the outcome is sure to be as great a success as could be wished for."
An interesting aspect of the National Road that sometimes catches the 21st century person by surprise is what leads to the continued improvement of roads. And most people would think, well, it's the automobile. Well, that's true to some degree. Remember that the majority of Americans cannot afford automobiles. This is the era in the early 20th century of what we call the recreational automobile. It's for the folks who have some money. But one of the things that's happening is as business expands, that how do you get from the rail lines to outlying cities? And one of the things that develops there is the use of trucks. And as those trucks start to use the various roads, and they find those roads in disrepair, they put a demand on the government to improve them. This is also happening about the same time that the government comes up with what's called rural free delivery, which means that the post office is going to go out into some areas. So there's a big increase in improving the roads for those reasons, not necessarily for the automobile.
By the 1920s and 30s, the federal government moved to play a bigger role, not only in highway construction, but in the organization of a national highway system. A standard highway numbering system was devised, with east-west routes given even numbers and north-south being odd-numbered. The national road now became a part of the new Route 40, a combination of roads that crossed the continent from coast to coast. By the 1950s, America is a nation on wheels.
Just imagine yourself with a new 1953 Chevrolet. You turn the key in Chevrolet's new Key Start ignition switch. The choke is automatic. When you shift into drive position, this new Power Glide starts in automatic low. This is a feature to give you more starting acceleration and to make the job of driving even more fully automatic. When you want to pass, you step down on the gas and Power Glide automatically goes smoothly into gear to put all that 115 horsepower engine to work, to whirl you by in a burst of speed.
See the USA in your Chevrolet. America's asking you to call. Drive your Chevrolet through the USA. America's the greatest land of all. On a highway or a road along a levee. Performance is sweeter, nothing can beat her. Life is completer in a Chevy. So make a date today to see the USA. See it in your Chevrolet.
It is actually the success of highways like the National Road in providing the access for the motoring public's love affair with the car that helps bring another great challenge, the rise of the interstates. In the late 1950s, the nation began the construction of a new highway system, both to meet the needs of a growing and increasingly mobile population and to provide a high-speed corridor for military travel in the event of a national emergency. One of the primary east-west links in this new interstate system is I-70, which parallels much of the road in West Virginia. While the interstate offers 4 lanes of smooth, high-speed driving comfort, it has not truly replaced the national road. Throughout its history, the road has always fulfilled its primary function: deliver the goods. That was as true in 1820 as it is today. The road has always played an important role in the development and support of business and industry.
Well, of the early products that Wheeling becomes famous for, one of those, of course, is tobacco. Tobacco would be grown by many farmers in parts of Ohio. And then when that national road goes through, that tobacco is then brought on these huge wagons that can carry tons of material. And they're bringing that material into Wheeling because Wheeling, as a nexus of transportation, has a lot of people coming through, primarily males. And smoking and chewing tobacco was a social habit of many males in the early 19th century. So people like Mifflin Marsh can establish a factory that develops tobacco products, particularly the stogie, a long, cheaply made cigar that people riding the wagons can smoke or chew on, and as they're, in that hours and hours of traffic on the national road. And as a consequence, tobacco becomes a very major product, and Marsh will be around for over 160 years. Now, one of the other products that Wheeling becomes famous for is nails, and it's the nail, I think, that makes Wheeling in the 19th century. And it's a combination of a couple factors. One, what the national road does in terms of connecting Wheeling to the west. The fact that raw materials are readily available in the manufacture of iron, and one of the most important aspects of that, besides the iron ore, is the fuel source. And as a consequence, we developed this technology to make a very simple cut nail. And why that's important is that the transportation, which is leading west, is taking people west, taking those folks out where they're going to have to build new homes. And the more people that are moving out there, the more homes they have to build. And so we change the way we build homes. We go to what we call balloon frame, stick frame. And what makes that possible is the manufacture of a cheap nail. And Wheeling develops that, and by the time the Civil War is around, we're producing something close to 50% of all the cut nails in the United States. So that most homes west of the Ohio River are probably put together, if they're constructed before 1860 or even 1870, they're probably constructed with nails from Wheeling.
People think of West Virginia in terms of steel, nails, tobacco, and stogie making. But it was also a great glass making center, and it still is so today. The history of glass making in the state of West Virginia really begins with the National Road and the Ohio River, which had its confluence here in Wheeling. In 1818, the National Road came through Wheeling. This was a super highway. Thousands of people traveled on it annually. And as a result of that, people started to establish businesses here. Many of these businesses were established to help travelers on their way west. Eventually, this led to an emerging middle class who wanted the finer things in life, including glass. There were 3 glass factories in Wheeling that were among the largest in America in their day. These factories produced hundreds of tons of glass and shipped it out per week. They employed about 1 out of every 10 people in Wheeling, and it was a tremendous industry, and it all really came about as a result of the National Road.
The legacy of the grand days of glass along the National Road is still being maintained at Island Mold and Machine, owned and operated by Tom and John Weishar, a company that is an unbroken link in the glass-making heritage along the road. The company produces high-quality molds for the hand-shop glass industry. While much of their work is done with modern machine tool equipment, some of the work is still done by hand, using traditional tools, hammers and chisels.
Our great-grandfather was in the Civil War in Kansas, and when he finished up in 1865, they traveled the National Road back to Wheeling, get back here about the 1880s. And then our grandfather started to work at the Central Glass Factory. And then our grandfather, he started a mold-making apprenticeship at Malky Mold and Machine up in Moorwood. And when he finished that, he went to Central. And then in 39, when Central closed, he was the mold shop foreman. Then he bought all the mold shop equipment and started the Island Mold in a 3-car garage on Wheeling Island. One of the items that we're working on right now is a 1939 Ford headlamp. It's actually a 2-light headlamp, and ironically enough, the year that we started business was 1939. And with all the thrill going on right now of refurbishing cars and fixing your rides and motorcycles, everybody's redoing or remodeling something, and that's what this is for retro kits. And this is actually the actual mold for it that will make that piece of glass.
The National Road is still important today. It is a living piece of history, whether it's in the form of an old mansion, a statue or monument, or a celebration. The road helps us satisfy our interest in our nation and ourselves. It helps define who we are. We often take our highway system for granted. Congestion, repairs, and the frantic pace of travel along the interstates may make us question the need for more roads. However, the historic National Road not only survives, it thrives. While the speeding interstate traffic bypasses hundreds of cities, towns, and villages, the National Road is intimately familiar with them. It is an old friend. It remembers and preserves the history and tells the tales of our nation. Today, the National Road is recognized as an all-American road, a fitting tribute to America's first interstate highway.